Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We want to talk about the Ontario provincial election today with two very knowledgeable people. Kim Wright, who is an NDPer, and she runs a government relations company. It's called what, right? Strategies?
That's correct.
And Noka, who I think is familiar to a lot of people that are listeners in the Mississauga, Brampton, Peel area. She's a former Peel school board trustee. She's been very activist historically within the Liberal Party, and now she's a podcast host. So she's trying to compete with me. But it's great to have her on board today to talk about the provincial election. Kim, let me start with you. You did a really interesting post, and I should stay off the top if I could, that because of some historical relationships I've had with some of the candidates, I'm going to try to stay as independent and as objective as possible in this discussion, and just ask questions and not provide any of my color commentary. But Kim, you wrote an interesting post about the two opposition leaders and their different launches. Tell me about that, please.
Yeah, so for the sports fans listening, I often say that everything that happened before the writ was regular season. Now we're into the playoffs. And what I always look for in that first press conference of the official campaign, so in this case, last Wednesday, Wednesday morning, and the stark contrast, frankly, between what I saw out of NDP leader Marit Stiles and Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie could not have been more different in tone, functionality, vibes, as I like to say. So you had Bonnie Crombie in a parking lot on a windy day, holding onto her hat, white knuckling, holding onto her papers, which with also a blue folder, which I'll park for a second there about not being brand loyal. By with one candidate, no one around her, no hoopla, no fanfare, and with this message of real leaders don't wear hats and slogans, but I'm going to wear a hat and a slogan, and even the hat's trying to get away from me. So we had that. And then you contrast that with Marit Stiles, who had a lot of her candidates around her, some really extraordinary incumbents, as well as some new folks, had a speech that both introduced her in some ways to Ontarians, her story of being a Newfoundlander, why she came, her and her family came here, better life, all of that. The failures of the Ford government, what she would do as premier. In fact, her podium sign said Marit Stiles for premier, where Bonnie said fix healthcare, Team Bonnie. Like the contrast of the two couldn't be more stark, and the vibe, energy, enthusiasm, and most people frankly see a lot of these things on mute. So if you look at the contrast between the two, one was clearly running for premier with energy and enthusiasm, the other was not so much. So I look at those things as the starting place. And then we got, we'll talk about day 2 and 3 on the campaign, which continue to showcase those differences for one running for premier, one not. And it was really a fascinating contrast on day 1 on that. You've got to hit your mark as you're introducing yourself to Ontarians. And Marit Stiles certainly did that.
Noka, what's your sense of the launches?
I agree with everything Kim just said. I was actually quite surprised to see Bonnie's launch. Because she's done this before.
Yeah.
I was at her leadership launch. It was incredible. The energy was amazing. She had all the candidates, or the former candidates and some of the wannabe candidates behind her. I don't understand why they would plan this way. It's not like they don't have people that they can line up behind her. It's not like they don't have the capacity to book a hall or book something that's a better backdrop. I don't understand the hat. I loved Doug Ford's hat. I'm a big fan of Doug Ford's hat. In fact, I ordered one myself. I'm still waiting for it. But her hat didn't make sense, right? The slogan was very long. I don't even remember it. I don't know if you remember it. I completely forgot what it was. Something about healthcare. And it's just not appropriate for a launch. You pull those stunts outside of, the launch. You don't do that at a launch. A launch is supposed to be a launch. It's supposed to be, your opportunity to showcase your team, to show some strength, to introduce yourself as a leader. And she did not do that. It was a failure of, her organization, to be honest. Because I know her team. I know, I know Bonnie. She has more than enough people to line up behind her to have a proper launch. I have no idea who made that decision and why. It was just terribly planned. So yes, and just on Marit's launch, believe it or not, I'm a really big fan of Marit. I've met her several times. I think she's absolutely wonderful. I think overall the NDP will have a tough time because of just the way things are and the way things are shaping up in Ontario. But I think she did a great job with her launch. And it was a proper launch. Like, it's that simple. She did what she was supposed to do. I don't know what Bonnie Crombie was doing.
Kim,
Yeah,
most of the polls.
I said that where it was Marit knocked it out of the park and Bonnie's still in the parking lot, right? It's clearly, somebody is running to be premier and the other, and Bonnie is still running to have an official party. And it just, then Marit launched her bus the next day and her rural platform. So both urban and rural seats. And this goes into, where does Marit Stiles and the New Democrats think they can pick up seats where that, Kitchener, Waterloo to Windsor corridor, Northern Ontario, Eastern Ontario, you'll see those. And everything, well, it is a campaign, felt incredibly authentic and leveled up, if you will. And, as I said, Bonnie's still kind of in the parking lot.
Yeah,
But yet most of the polls that I've seen suggest that the Liberals are up, the NDP are down.
So I will always go back to what happened on election day in 2022, right? The exit polls, the voter turnout polls, the actual proportion of vote polls. The New Democrats and the Liberals had exactly the same percentage number, but the seat counts was significantly different. New Democrats are official party status and all that comes with that. And the Liberals, for the second time in a row, did not have official party status. And in fact, their leader, Stephen Del Duca, couldn't win his own seat. Are we seeing shades of that again, recognizing that the event, it took her well over a year, but Bonnie Crombie finally chose a seat when nothing else was available. It wasn't like they had to work around Liberal incumbents. So finally chose a seat, but she's going up against Patrick Brown's mother-in-law, who's got a rich history in Mississauga politics. She's ran before. Her family, her brother is an MPP as well. Of all the places, this doesn't scream safe Liberal Bonnie seat. So again, they're going to have the Del Duca problem of, can you fill in a party status? Can you win your own seat? And what makes you think you can be premier if you can't do those first two things?
What do you think, Dolka? Has she got a chance of winning Mississauga East Cooksville?
So I think she has a chance. I don't think it's a good chance. And I think, going back to the polling, I think it really depends on where the Liberals and the NDP are competitive, right? So the NDP, and unfortunately for them, they're not very competitive in Mississauga. Sometimes in Brampton they are, but not so much in Mississauga. So really, this is about, when you look at some of the polls that are saying that Doug Ford's at 50%. And the Liberals are still quite far behind. That doesn't always translate to winning areas such as Mississauga, because Mississauga will tend to lean a little bit more conservative on the best of days. In terms of her running in Cooksville, I don't think that's the safest bet for her. I thought she should have ran in Toronto. I thought she should have ran against an NDP in a Toronto riding where she could potentially resonate a little bit more and try to get a seat in Toronto. I don't know. She has a chance, but not a big chance, not a great chance. But
so you and I had an exchange offline on this topic, and it was your argument in that conversation that she should be running in Toronto for the reasons that you identified, and I had argued that if she did that, she would be running for MPP to run for premier, she has to run for Mississauga. What do you think of that?
I agree, but I think we can all agree that she's running for MPP. I can't imagine that that there's going to be a scenario where she's going to become premier on February 27th. The reality is the party's not ready, right? Whether it's her fault or not, that can be debated. She hasn't had enough time, that's for sure. And I think to a certain extent, they just didn't believe that Doug Ford will pull the plug early, and they thought that
He's been threatening it for what,
6 months,
year?
8 months,
yeah,
easily.
yeah,
Right?
right?
Like this is Babe Ruth calling his shot. This is why the Doug bucks, the rebate quote unquote checks were starting to drop at the same time as the writ. Oh, mysteriously happened to happen. Now, of course, I'm sure the premier didn't expect that those checks would start to bounce and that their election platforms and their rebate checks weren't worth the paper they were printed on. But we'll park that. But look, Bonnie had been leader for over a year now. She was running for this for a year before that. Uh, the fact that they didn't have a seat for her, that she is acting almost like she's the guest host of the Liberal Party in Ontario, is shocking to me. It's not like she hasn't been elected on and off for decades. And maybe her machinery was getting a little rusty from being mayor and not really having to run real campaigns for that. But there's no reason why it took so long, which begs the question, what did Mississaugas know about her that on rest of Ontario should know about her? Like if she was reticent about running in Mississauga, what is supposedly her home base in Fortress Bonnie, and it's clearly not. So what does that say for the rest of Ontarians who are just like, who are you? We don't know you, but we know you've been kind of elected, whether that was on Hazel McCallion's coattails or not. Uh, we kind of know of you, but who are you? What is your authenticity? What is it you're bringing to the table? And she couldn't find a seat. It wasn't like she had to move a Liberal incumbent because there was 8 of them. So what does that say? And then we look to what we've seen from their announcements the last couple of days. She launched her campaign office opening, Bonnie Crombie did. And all of the questions, there were 10 questions, and like 7 of them were, why can't you win? Why are you running here? Why does Patrick Brown hate you so much? Can you possibly win? For somebody who's supposed to be running for premier, those are pretty damning questions on day 1 and day 2. And when she was asked about tariffs, she frankly gave this almost unhinged laugh. Like she wasn't taking it seriously. This is somebody who, if you want to be premier, these are the things you should be able to answer. And I'll tell you, I look at the contrast. Marit Stiles released her rural plan. She had her urban launch. She has a bus. She's got 220,000 individual donors across the country that have donated to her over the last little while. Those are arms and legs across the province. She was in Windsor talking to auto workers. She put out a really great video. Viewers should check it out online on any of Marit Stiles' social platforms on tariffs and what does that mean and what is she going to do about it. And that's the kind of thing when you have a podium sign that says Marit Stiles for premier, you better be able to show up and back it up. And she is absolutely doing that every single day.
This is going to be an interesting conversation tonight. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes with Noka and Kim talking about the provincial election and particularly the leaders. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. My guests tonight are Noka Dakrub and Kim Wright. Noka is no stranger to people listening in from Peel. She's been on this station on numerous occasions, often interviewing me, which is kind of fun to turn the tables. She's a former school board trustee, someone who lots of people thought was going to be running for politics and was going to be was one of those candidates that we would be interviewing and seeing on the hustings, and undoubtedly she will in the future. And Kim Wright, who runs a public affairs strategy group and has been very involved in the New Democratic Party. And we're going to focus primarily on the opposition parties tonight. I had hoped that a Conservative would join us, and we'll probably do that show again with a Conservative. But right now, Kim, maybe start with you. Ford looks like, as Noka said, he could win over 50% of the public vote. I saw a poll the other day that that had both parties, the NDP and the Liberal, not gaining official party status, and that Ford would increase his majority. What do you think is the chance of that?
So, a couple of things that, obviously we see these bubbles all the time. And then when you start to get onto the hustings and questions get asked every day by reporters around Premier Ford's now record for the last 7 years, the 2.5 million Ontarians don't have a family doctor. Brian, you probably saw this on all the news. There were people a couple of weeks ago, a doctor outside of London, Ontario, said, I'm going to open up my family doctor practice for the first 500 people in line. There were hundreds and hundreds of people who lined up in a snowstorm to get the opportunity to maybe have a family doctor. That kind of a fiasco is firmly at the feet of Doug Ford. We look at everything he doesn't want to talk about, right? The state of our schools, that a lot of them need capital investments. He wants to talk about, well, let's widen the QEW. Great, fine. But the fact that home health care, this was the Ontario at Home program, that was supposed to help people in palliative care or to not have to stay in those crumbling hospitals to be able to heal at home. They couldn't get them gauze and tape and pain medications. Like, people were having to order it off of Amazon to maybe get reimbursed by the province. That's such a fiasco. They had to fire the CEO of this agency that the Ford government set up. How is that happening in the province of Ontario? Mismanagement and wanting to talk about tunnels under the 401 and everything else he can change the channel on. So now we are in an election campaign where every single day the premier is going to get challenged, both from media, from the general public, during debate or debates, depending on how many the premier wants to show up for. And people start to go, is my life really better today than it was 7 years ago? We also have the premier's had to admit that he's never actually met with Donald Trump. So this notion of I'm Captain Canada, I'm going to go duke it out because I'm businessman to businessman, turns out in the 7 years, Donald Trump's the first term and now, can't get a meeting, can't even get a selfie with him. Like, this man cannot negotiate his way out of a wet paper bag. And now people are starting to pay attention to that. And it is up to the opposition parties, in particular Marit Stiles, to say, this is your alternative to what has been over the last 7 years with Doug and with the Moon McGuinty government before that. It doesn't have to be this way. And here's practically how we can do this differently and better. And then it becomes the question of who shows up. How do they show up? How do they show up on the debate stage when in those moments in the campaign when everyone is paying attention? And then Doug Ford has the last thing he's got to worry about. When you have polling numbers that seem astronomical, your people don't want to show up. It's cold in February. Why would I show up? John Michetician, who is a longtime conservative strategist and backroom guy, was on the agenda the other night saying last election, the premier lost 1 million voters from 2018 to 2022. That was in a June election when it's not cold outside. How many are going to stay home this time? How many are just going to be like, I don't know, but Doug, I can't, we'll see. I'll tell you, Marit's voters, super motivated. I saw people out pounding in signs up in Northern Ontario the other day. You're pretty committed at that point if you're going to start doing that. So we're really excited, but it's a hard job, no question. But election campaigns are when you can start poking into those big bubbles.
Noka, you criticized the hat and the slogan about healthcare, but that image in Walkerton of all those people lining up to get a family doctor was stark. And I've been hearing it for years that people can't get a family doctor in Mississauga, in Toronto, that people can't get a family doctor, and that you go to an emergency in Toronto, in Mississauga and Peel. It's packed with people that should just be going to a family doctor, to a walk-in clinic, not crowding our emergency. And so therefore it is a huge issue. And I think people are worried about Trump's threats and tariffs, but healthcare you worry about day in and day out, and you worry about with your kids. And so maybe the hat wasn't great, but wasn't the topic, wasn't the issue the right issue to launch on?
Oh, absolutely. I think healthcare in Ontario is crumbling, and I think there needs to be a lot more investments and creative problem solving for healthcare, because some of these issues aren't just going to be solved with money. You can't, you know, buy doctors with money. You know, you need to you need to find the professionals, right? So there's a lot of issues that are pretty complicated that need to be addressed. But here's the problem. I don't know if the average voter believes that Bonnie Crombie is going to be fixing them. That's the
So she
problem.
committed to get everyone a family doctor in 4 years.
But that's
Is that
not a
possible?
realistic promise, right? Look, I mean, we can get into policy if you want, but the way to fix and I've said this to Marit, and I've said this to Bonnie also, but for some reason nobody's talking about this. The way to fix the primary care issue is to have nurse practitioners become more independent and be able to bill OHIP directly. You're not going to just magically create doctors, right? Where are you? How are you going to do that? Where are you going to find them? I'm going to give everybody a family doctor. Okay, from where? So, you know, it takes more than 4 years to become a doctor. So how are you, you know, even if you started, okay, let's say she gets into government tomorrow, right? How is she going to get every Ontarian a family doctor in 4 years when it takes more than 4 years to become a doctor? And we don't have enough schools for them. We don't have enough residency spots. We don't have enough opportunities for people to become doctors. So you have to make promises that are realistic. The average Canadian isn't stupid. They understand these things, right? They understand that doctors don't grow on trees, and you can't throw, this is a problem you can't throw money on. If you could throw money on this problem, this would have been resolved. But there are other creative solutions in healthcare that, you know, can be used to address the problem. And, you know, they're not looking at that because it's a better, I guess it's a better catchphrase to say, I'm going to get everybody a family doctor in 4 years. But personally, I believe that, and I've always believed this, I believe that the average voter is actually quite intelligent. I think people who don't pay attention to stuff and are easily, you know, fooled by things don't go out to vote, because they're not interested in this, you know, in policy and policy discussions. And I think when the average voter is going to hear a promise such as, I'm going to get everybody a family doctor in 4 years, they're going to say, I don't know about that one. So that becomes, you know, a credibility issue, right? It becomes an issue of, you're making promises in the air, and yes, this guy isn't great, and we know he isn't great, and he hasn't done a great job, you know, solving these issues. I mean, they probably think he's great because he's at 50%, so they probably think he's great on some level, right? But there's a recognition in Ontario that healthcare has not been managed very well, neither by Ford nor by the Liberals before them, right? So it's not, this is not a Ford created problem. But I think the reality comes down to, who do I believe? Okay, we have a problem. Who do I believe actually knows how to fix this problem? And I think the Bonnie's biggest challenge is that it's not that she's not really interested in fixing a problem, and it's not that, you know, she hasn't been able to point out at a serious problem that's impacting people's lives, is that she's not presenting serious solutions that are believable to people. And I don't think the average person actually is sitting there thinking, okay, she's the person who's going to fix healthcare, and that's going to be her biggest challenge.
So Kim,
especially if she wants to run on that, and especially since the Liberals have been in government before, and healthcare wasn't great back then either. I used to work in healthcare. I've worked in healthcare under the Wynne government and under the Ford government. And I'll tell you something, from what I've seen, there was more money in healthcare during the Ford years, right? What I've seen on the ground, right? But you know, and you see that in his budget, he spends more money than Kathleen Wynne. But the reality is, we need creative solutions to fix the healthcare problem, and no one is talking about that. It's not just a money problem.
So Kim, why is Ford potentially at 50% or higher? You say that it may come down, and I understand that, but you know, when you think about the RCMP investigating the Greenbelt scandal and the Greenbelt scandal itself. You think about Ontario Place, you think about the Science Center, you think about tunneling under the 401, you think about the problems that we've talked about with healthcare. Think about the problems with education. We could go on, but it seems like all that doesn't resonate. How come? And your leader has been leader for a while now, and your prior leader was excellent. Now the mayor of Hamilton. Why hasn't the NDP resonated?
Well, I think you've seen them resonate. Now, what I will say is that half of Ontarians don't like the premier. And it is the job of the opposition parties then to figure out, okay, so what is the alternative? Who is that alternative? And I'll tell you, the last few days watching, you talk about the lack of credibility. The leader of the Liberal Party decided to talk about transit safety yesterday, and that her big pledge is going to fund platform screen doors, which the cost of that is $4 billion. And when asked if she knew the cost of it, she's like, I don't know. I don't know, but that's the price we're going to pay for safety. Like, you can't just bibbity bobbity boop your way into a platform. And that's what the challenge continues to be. So that lack of credibility is almost laughable if it wasn't so serious. And so, in the same way we talk about, okay, so the premier has spent more money than anybody ever in the creation of humanity on healthcare. Great. We're spending gobsmacking amounts of money. Like, it will water your eyes how much money we spend in healthcare. And yet we still have 2.5 million Ontarians without a family doctor. We still have hallway medicine where we have emergency rooms that are being shut down. So what are we spending the money on? What is that value for money? We had during the pandemic, lots of communities who didn't have access to an in-person family doctor had video chats with their doctors or the specialists. They changed the funding mechanism. So now no doctors want to do it because it's worth half of what an in-person is. So in places like my hometown, where you would have to go 3 towns over to get a family doctor or to get the results from your specialist, you got to drive an hour down, find parking, do all the things, take that out of your day, as opposed to just logging in on a Zoom call, which is what we did during the pandemic.
So Noka's right. Money's not the solution.
issue. Money isn't always the solution on this. There is gobsmacking amounts, but there does need to be a premier in place and a minister of health. That is, how do we do this better? Not how do we just get it privatized and all the rest of it. How do we do this better? Because there's a lot in the system. There's a lot of money in the system. There's a lot of talent in the system. How do we better utilize that for outcomes? I say to every one of my clients, what is the problem we're trying to solve for? That is the approach that, frankly, any government should start to take, whether we're talking about healthcare or encampments. What are the problems we're trying to solve for? Demonstrably, life has not gotten better. We walk in our neighborhoods, we walk in our communities, and it doesn't matter, urban, rural, southern, northern, doesn't matter. But there are tent cities everywhere that you can't get an affordable place to live. If you're on a minimum wage job, working a full-time, you can't afford a 1-bedroom anywhere in the province of Ontario if something is available. These are failures of the Ontario government. And you can't just wish them better. You can't bibbity bobbity boop your way out of it. There has to be authentic ways and problem solving for this. And that's where I'm really excited
about why is he at 50% then?
Because people want to believe sometimes it's easier and that Uncle Dougie's got your back. But now they're realizing that that's
he gives them their phone number, his personal cell phone number.
Sure. And I still can't, you still can't get a family doctor. And so what does he act like? Sure, he's going to take your call. Great. Now what? Then what? It's like you could call that person in Nova Scotia to talk to them about tourism, 1-800 call Peggy or whatever it was that great. You talk to him. Great. But you still have people lining up in the snow. So it is the opposition party's job to point this out. But also in this instance, in this time, in this place, who can be better? What does an alternative look like? where are the real ideas? Where is the authenticity? Where is the actual plan beyond sloganeering? And you point to Brian Ontario Place and the Science Center. You know, Marit Stiles said this the other day at the NDP's launch. You know, Doug Ford can't negotiate his way out of a wet paper bag. And I think most Ontarians kind of see that, right? So what is the alternative? How can they show up? And you say that, you know, people have been around a while. Elections are the moment in time where people see who they are, see where that authenticity is, what are their experiences. It really is the first introduction that most Ontarians have of opposition leaders is during that election campaign.
I can buy some of that argument, but Marit Stiles has been an MPP. You know, Noka made the argument. You made the argument that maybe Bonnie Crombie should have been elected as an MPP and sitting in the legislature for the last while. But Marit Stiles has been there for a while. She's been leader for longer than Bonnie has been leader.
By a year, yeah.
And yet people don't seem to know her.
That's actually not an accurate statement. In fact, her favorables are quite high. She's got 220,000 unique individual donors from across the province. She's been in lots of communities across the province. And I'll say this is a very large province. When pollsters talk about province-wide numbers, they'll candidly tell you this province could actually be broken up into 5 or 6 different polling regions. And those are all different. Those are all unique. But what I know to be true is that in election campaigns after election campaigns, it's how people show up locally. What is that feeling they have once the campaign has started? What are those candidates? Can you show that what does your front bench look like of a government? I mean, you go back to what Doug Ford in 2018 said, here is my first cabinet. And people were like, oh, I may think you were whatever, but I like that person or this person. And so when I look around at the candidates that Marit Stiles has, her personal popularity, her personal favorables, high levels of integrity, we saw that in the Ipsos poll that just came out, high levels of integrity, people quite like Marit when they get to know her. Unfortunately for Ms. Crombie, people don't quite like her when they've gotten to know her. So they like Marit, they're interested, they think she's got integrity. And now it's, okay, so what do you have on offer? And who is that front bench? I start to look at folks like Catherine Fife from Kitchener-Waterloo, who's been the NDP finance critic. She is a fierce woman, but and is quite liked by stakeholders. I look at people like France Jelena from Nickel Belt, who has been the health critic and is extraordinary at rooting out what are those problems in healthcare and how do we fix it? What are those solutions to fix it? I look at folks like John Vantoff, again from Northern Ontario, steady as you go farmer, former dairy farmer, just like steady as you go, very and House leader for the New Democrats. Jennifer French in Oshawa. You know, I look at these candidates and these MPPs that people know and respect, and that kind of thing is, oh, you are actually ready for governing. Okay, this is interesting. Let's take those arms and legs out for a spin.
We got to take a break for some messages, and I'm going to come back and ask Noka, what does Bonnie Crombie need to do to change the trajectory? Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes.
Ed.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Noka Dakrub and Kim Wright are my guests tonight, one historically from the Liberal Party, one historically from the NDP, to talk about the Ontario provincial election. And Kim has just gone through all the strengths that the leader of the NDP has. Noka, you know Bonnie, you know Mississauga politics, you know Peel politics. You know, you've commented that the NDP aren't very strong in Mississauga, and so therefore, if the Liberals are going to do well in the Ontario election, they've got to do well in Mississauga and Peel. And lots of people think that Mississauga and Peel really is the bellwether or the decider for majority government. If Mississauga and Peel go conservative, then Doug Ford wins a majority government. If they don't go conservative, then it's a minority or potentially something different. In the last municipal election, she's won 70-80% of the vote in Mississauga. So if you were advising Bonnie Crombie, what would you tell her to do?
I hate to say this. There's nothing to do. It's too late. I could be.
Kim says the last couple of years haven't mattered. What matters is the campaign. The campaign only started a couple days ago.
It's not. It is true. You're right. But it matters in the sense that Doug Ford would have to do something significantly terrible to decrease his own popularity, right? Like for the Liberals to do well, the Conservatives have to do worse, right? So competing with the NDP isn't really going to get them anywhere. Unfortunately.
But 50%, Kim says, of Ontarios, maybe more, don't like Doug Ford. So isn't it really that you got to decide who is the potential leader of the progressive vote or the center left vote, and whoever wins that. And last time it was the NDP, even though as
and the time before that to be clear, because the Liberals didn't win official party status in the last two elections.
And so, the way that it works, I think, is if the popularity is equal, the NDP will, because of the distribution of the votes, win most seats. But if the Liberals go, 4-5 points better, and right now the polls actually have the Liberals 4 or 5 points better than the NDP. If they can do that, then they can win those seats.
So, but are we talking about winning government or just winning like 5 extra seats? Because those are two different things, right?
Isn't it both? So let me ask you the question two different ways then. If you want to get more seats than the NDP and win official party status, what do you do? Or if you want to win government, what do you do? Are the answers different?
Yes, the answers are different. To win government, I personally think it's too late, because they've already branded her as too similar to Trudeau. They're going to go after her on her record of raising property taxes in Mississauga, and they've already done that, actually. And people just haven't gotten to know her in the time that she's been the leader. She doesn't even have a full slate. The organization is just not ready.
The NDP don't have a full slate.
Yes,
but we actually have to do nomination meetings, and again, the bibbity bobbity boop, you get to appoint it if you're a Liberal.
Right. So but the expectations are also a little bit different between the NDP and the Liberals. No offense, Kim. So, I think in terms of winning government, her walking into the Premier's office on February 28th or whenever she would do that, that's not happening. And I think we can all tell that that's not happening. You can see from a launch that didn't go well, to her own campaign launch in Mississauga that was poorly attended, questions that are not getting answered properly, no platform that's shiny and exciting, a very long, not memorable slogan on a hat. Like, none of these things are going to get you in government, and time is ticking. We've got 4 weeks to go, even less than that. So I think we have to say goodbye to the dream of being in government. But she can win more seats. And how she wins more seats is by focusing all of her resources, whatever resources she has, and she does not have much, right, on targeting specific seats that she wants to win from the NDP in Toronto, and maybe a couple from the Conservatives, but I think it's mainly going to be.
So she should go against the NDP and Myritt Stiles, not against Doug Ford. But I haven't heard anything at all negative about her NDP opposition. It's only been an attack against Doug Ford,
because she believes she's going to become the Premier, and that's what they're hoping to accomplish. And one more thing she has to do, she must do this. Now that she's picked a seat in Mississauga, she has to win that seat in Mississauga. If she does not win a seat in Mississauga and she decided to take a risk and run in Mississauga, it's entirely embarrassing. It's severely embarrassing for her to lose a seat in Mississauga after being the mayor for so many years. It's a political career ending
But the more
situation.
time she spends in Mississauga winning that seat, the less chance she's got of persuading people across Ontario to vote for her in the Liberal Party.
And that's what happens when you're doing so poorly as a party and you don't even have enough people to put in as candidates. I said yesterday on our podcast that every day I go on my Instagram and my friends are getting nominated one after the other. These are people that I grew up with as a young Liberal, and they're wonderful people. They're fantastic people, but it's not usually a good sign when, you know, you're basically nominating candidates within the same circle of friends or a bubble, because it just means that you just don't have anybody else, right? So I think her best bet is to focus all of her resources, and they are very few. They don't have money. There are no volunteers coming in February to help the Ontario Liberal Party. It's not happening. And you focus all of
because
those
of winter or because of the federal leadership campaign?
Because of her
because
campaign.
of everything. Yeah, because of everything. Winter, nobody wants to knock on doors in February. That sucks, right? And Doug Ford knows that. Because of, you know, how poorly organized they've been, because of the brand that's been severely tarnished by the federal Liberals and by the provincial Liberals by Kathleen Wynne. And on top of that, because there's a way more exciting leadership race happening federally, that guy is going to become prime minister the next day. And yes, I said that guy because Carney is most likely going to win. And everybody wants to be there. And guess what? You don't have to go out in the cold for that one. So it's a great place to be more involved. So they don't have resources. What they have to do, what they should be doing, is focusing all of their resources on any seats, probably in Toronto, that they could potentially win. And they should also focus a lot of resources on trying to get her own seat, so she can at least have a seat in the legislature.
To fight again in 4 years?
Well, I don't know if she'll stay 4 years again. Like that's a whole.
Why fight to have a seat if you're not going to stay for the 4 years and just not be embarrassed?
Because it's embarrassing. Well, you know, you don't want to. Yeah, can you imagine being a mayor she was really popular as mayor? I was there. She was extremely popular as the mayor of the city. People loved her, and all of a sudden she becomes a leader of a party.
Barely became on like the fourth ballot. Like this should have been this should have been a cakewalk, a coronation. I mean, no offense, Brian, but back in the day, you guys had a Christmas card that had her on a golden throne. I mean, the Liberal Party had her on a golden throne, literally at times and figuratively. And she barely squeaked by. She was uninspiring, but, you know, momentum shifts. I mean, you look at those riding by riding breakdowns, and nobody wanted to come out and vote, and nobody really wanted to come out to vote for her. So which is partially why they had such a heck of a time trying to find a place for her to run. Mm-hmm. I mean, and then there was never a Bonnie bump. There was never a, you know, all right, Liberals, we got this. The Del Duca campaign was, you know, it was a blip. The win completely burning the furniture in 18, where Liberal spokesperson Omar Khan went out and said Doug Ford would be better for Ontario than the New Democrats. Liberals have this hatred for New Democrats. And they were like, yeah, go Doug. He's our guy in that campaign. And continue to do that because they want the next one and the next one and the next one. But Bonnie was supposed to be their redemption, their salvation, their queen of queens. And then every single day of this election campaign, every single day, a campaign that has been telegraphed for months, has been an unmitigated disaster for the Ontario Liberal Party. They literally, the hats, their beloved hat, tried to blow off of Bonnie's head. Like it even wanted to get away from this cringe fest of a campaign launch.
You can't control the weather. Give me a break.
No, but if you're a good tour organizer, and they have good tour organizers, you check the weather and you have an alternative venue. So either they don't have money for an alternative venue, or they didn't care enough. I mean, Rooney Sunak, the former UK Prime Minister, did a campaign launch in the downpours. and then continued to do bad events where he had an exit sign behind him. Like Bonnie Crombie's campaign launch was awful out in the and followed up by her office opening that everyone looked like they wanted to get out of there as fast as they can if they bothered to show up. And then day three was I'm going to stand in front of a transit station with the boop 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 of the crosswalks and just talk about transit. And like she knows what it's going to do, but she didn't know the cost. She didn't talk to Mayor Chow about her priorities for transit. But please, let's talk about how this is a well choreographed campaign. Liberals continue to cringe over this campaign launch. There isn't the Bonnie bounce. There is a real challenge when your leader couldn't figure out where she was going to run.
Mhm.
And you contrast that by the extraordinary week, the great crowds, great energy, great visuals, the campaign bus, Marit Stiles for premier on your side.
So if given
It's
all that, why
really
are the
just
current polls showing the NDP down and the Liberals up?
you're going to see fluctuations of polls to polls, but as I said, there are 5 different sections of this province that really do make up those polls. So New Democrats are always going to be a bit farther behind in province wide because, as you point out, Mississauga is a bit of a challenge, and that does bring those down. But the energy and excitement and vibrancy I saw her everywhere last week was extraordinary. People are like, and even the call-in shows after the campaign launch, those 2 dramatically opposed campaign launches. The call-in shows was, okay, who is this Marit Stiles? I would like to know more about her. That's the kind of launch you need to have a shot at this. The next big things will be that people will very much pay attention to will be the debates.
Yeah.
That's when you have the contrast of all the party leaders that have representation in the House, even those that don't have official party, like the Green Party and the Liberals. They'll all be on the stage, and you can compare and contrast. And those will be the things that people are doing. But I'll tell you, people out there knocking on doors, they're making calls, they're seeing it, and they're seeing on the nightly news, and they're seeing on their social media feeds, energy versus white knuckling a baseball cap that nobody could read.
We're almost out of time. Noka, I got to ask you the last question. So if Kim's right, and I'm not saying she is, but if she's right,
Not just a snappy last name.
if Kim's right and not just a slapping last name, the Liberals could be facing a third election where they don't have official party status. You're a long-term Liberal. You've been very invested in the Liberal Party. What's the Liberal Party got to do in the next couple of days? As you say, should they just go to Toronto and fight NDPers to win the progressive vote, or do they make a statement against Doug Ford across the province? Do they just give up and go to Mark Carney and fight the federal election? What would be your advice to all those people that have been part of the Liberal Party for such a long period of time and firmly believe that there is a future for the Liberal Party in Ontario?
I'll tell you, people I know, most of my friends have given up and are now hanging around with Mark Carney, hoping that there will be a revival federally. But what they should do is certainly put all of their energy and all of their resources into seats that they can win that are realistic, and not necessarily waste their time and energy on big stunts where they can where Bonnie's trying to take on Doug Ford. That's just not a realistic possibility at this point in time. I agree with Kim. The launch was quite terrible, and the thing is with launches is all of your photos, your follow-up photos, the media is going to use that, right? So now all of her follow-up photos in every article, or most of them, are going to be of her holding on to this hat, and the hat is flying away, and she's got this angry face, and it's just not good. And that stuff is memorable. So the launch, and then you're right, the debate is the next time that they will pay attention, where I will presume Doug Ford will do very, 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 very well. And Bonnie, we all love her, but she does have a little bit of a harder time, on her feet, right? So she requires a lot more preparation in terms of debates and answering questions. And Doug Ford doesn't. He's just going to be the king of the debate. I could tell you that from now. And we'll see how it goes. Honestly, if Bonnie, her team, anybody's listening, focus all of your energy and resources on the seats that you have a chance at winning, and hopefully you make it to party status and win a seat for your leader, and then grow from there, because otherwise the Ontario Liberal Party is in deep, deep trouble.
Kim Wright, Noka Dakrub, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. This has been an interesting conversation. It's going to be an interesting month to watch what goes on with politics. And, as historically a firm member and supporter of the Liberal Party, it's going to be interesting for me to see what happens. But I'm not involved at all this election campaign at all. So I'm just going to watch it from the outside and as an announcer. That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. All my podcasts and videos go up on social media, YouTube, and podcast servers as soon as the radio show goes to air. Thanks for joining us, Kim, Naku, thank you so much for joining us. Good night, everybody.